In Britain, the clock is ticking. There are just 50 days remaining before it's scheduled to leave the European Union, but no divorce deal has been struck. What does that mean for Scotland? Nearly 3 years ago, England and Wales voted in favour of Brexit, but Scotland and Northern Ireland didn't. Now, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wants to hold a vote to separate from Britain after the country rejected independence in 2014. It's not clear when she'll hold that vote, but this week she's touring North America, warning that Britain is headed for a hard exit, and the UK isn't remotely prepared, she says, for the consequences. And joining me now from Toronto is the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Hi there, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
I want to start, of course, by talking about Brexit, and I wanted to get a sense from you about what you think about the timeline. What are the chances that there is an actual deal that could be reached by the deadline that's been set out?
Well, it still is very difficult to see how a deal is going to be agreed before the deadline. It's not impossible, but there is no clear path to it at the moment. So the risk of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union at the end of March with no deal is a very real risk. And that's why there's an increasing view in the UK that we should be requesting an extension to the deadline to give more time to allow different approaches to be taken, because the implications and consequences of leaving with no deal are really severe and will be felt across many aspects of life. So my view is we should be seeking to extend that deadline to avoid that happening.
How do you decide by how much to extend it? We've been following the whole thing sort of from the outside here, and there's so much back and forth. There's so sort of many domestic politics at play. I'm just wondering, how much extra time do you think would get you to a deal?
Well, my view is it shouldn't simply be more time to keep trying to find a deal, because that's proved very elusive over the last 2.5 years. My view is that given the deadlock in the political system, the UK should seek more time to allow another referendum to put the decision back to the electorate. That might be the only way to resolve this issue, because the whole thing has been handled terribly badly, and now we face the prospect of a no-deal exit within, well, fewer than 50 days now. And even if there is a deal, and this is quite an important point, even if a deal was agreed by the House of Commons next week, it is probably the case that there isn't enough time left to do all of the legislative steps to give effect to that. So there needs to be an extension anyway, but it would make more sense for that extension to be for a purpose and for enough time to be given to allow another referendum to take place.
I take your point, and I know there are a lot of people that support it, but Prime Minister May is not among them. How realistic do you think that ask is?
Well, it's not inevitable that will happen. I don't underestimate the challenges, and certainly you're right, the Prime Minister is not a supporter of the second referendum option. That said, the Prime Minister is really not entirely in control of events anymore. She doesn't have a majority for what she wants to do. So as we get closer to the day of exit, which is the 29th of March, I think minds will focus, and if there is still no deal, then I think it is possible, not inevitable, but possible, that support for a second referendum will grow, and that may be something that could command a majority in the House of Commons. Because, while people in the UK are finding it difficult to agree on what should happen, there is a very strong body of opinion that the one thing that should not happen is that the UK crashes out with no deal at all.
I've read some criticism of you saying that you were not making yourself available for talks that the Prime Minister requested you be at. I think it was Tory MSP Adam Tompkins who said that you're not interested in negotiating an orderly Brexit. What's your response to that?
Well, it's absolute nonsense. I mean, I've met the Prime Minister countless times over the last couple of years. I've met her countless times just in the last weeks and months to try to persuade her to take a different approach, to drop the red lines that have made it so difficult to reach a deal, and to look at alternative options. I was in Downing Street talking with her just a couple of weeks ago, and no doubt will do so again. The meeting I think Adam Tompkins was talking about was a meeting that one of my ministers was at, and that was the meeting to look at no deal preparations. And of course the Scottish Government, although we don't want to be in this position, let's not forget Scotland voted to remain in the EU. We certainly, we don't want to leave at all, but we don't want to leave with no deal. But we're having to spend a lot of time and effort preparing for that eventuality. So, the problem here hasn't been the Scottish Government's unwillingness to talk. The problem has been the UK Government's unwillingness to listen.
Well, on that, what are those conversations like with the Prime Minister? Are there any signs that she appears to be persuaded by some of your arguments?
The discussions are quite frustrating at times. The Prime Minister is sticking rigidly to red lines that have made it very difficult from the outset for her to reach an agreement that can command majority support. Red lines such as ending free movement of people, which I think is the wrong thing to do for a whole variety of reasons. Red lines such as ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice and having an independent trade policy. And those red lines make it difficult then to pursue the closest possible relationship between the UK and the EU, for example, remaining within the European single market and its customs union. So as long as those red lines are rigidly adhered to by the Prime Minister, she doesn't have a lot of options in terms of finding a way through this. So she's not really listening to many people who are arguing for her to drop those red lines. But the closer we get to exit date, I think those voices have to continue to be heard so that we can get a different approach. And I think minds will focus over these next few weeks because, as I said at the outset, the implications of the UK leaving the EU with no deal are severe and will be felt by almost everybody across the UK.
Can I ask you to paint a picture of what you think those implications will look like if there is no deal? Like, what does it look like for the UK overall if there isn't a deal?
Well, all of our trading system right now is governed by European rules and regulations. If they cease to have effect immediately with no transition period, then we will be talking about queues at customs ports, difficulty getting our goods to market, difficulty importing goods, aeroplanes being restricted in how and where they can fly across the European mainland. And that's why every day in the UK right now there are stories about potential food shortages, medicines shortages, and it is quite absurd and incredible that a prosperous country like the UK in peacetime is contemplating implications like that. And that underlines why the Prime Minister should be ruling out the UK leaving with no deal and preparing to seek an extension of Article 50, because those are some of the implications we'd be looking at.
How will Brexit affect the timing of the second referendum on Scottish independence?
Well, we need to wait and see how things develop over the next few weeks and which direction the UK goes in. Will it leave with a deal? Will it leave with no deal? Will there be an extension, which means it doesn't leave at all? Is there going to be a second EU referendum, possibly a UK general election? When that becomes clearer, I will set out as First Minister my views on the timing of another independence referendum. But one thing is beyond doubt, the whole experience of the last 2.5 years on Brexit has strengthened the case for Scotland being independent, for not having decisions that are so fundamental to our future taken by Westminster against our wishes, and instead having the ability to take those decisions ourselves. Ireland is an independent member of the EU and is experiencing great solidarity from the EU right now. Instead, Scotland's voice in the UK is being ignored, which makes the argument for independence all the stronger.
I just want to be clear, though. So until everything is clear with Brexit and the timeline, you won't be setting out a timeline for that independence vote?
Until we've got some more clarity. So within the next few weeks, I would expect to give my views on what I think the timeline should be.
OK, thanks so much, First Minister Sturgeon. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Great to talk to you. Thank you.